Dear listeners, thank you for your incredible support in helping our channel grow. We're aiming for 1,000 subscribers, so please support us by subscribing and helping us reach this milestone. Now let's start the story. You know how sometimes life turns your world upside down in an instant? That's exactly what happened to me one ordinary Thursday afternoon. But maybe I should start from the beginning, because looking back, the signs were always there. I just hadn't seen them. Not until it was almost too late. It started like any other day. I was at work, drowning in paperwork, trying to finalize a major contract that could put my company on the map. Business had been booming, and this deal would secure our future, my future, Katie's future, and our son Jacob's future. Life was good, or at least, that's what I thought. Then my phone buzzed. At first, I ignored it, too focused on the numbers in front of me. But something made me glance down at the screen. An unfamiliar number. Normally, I would have let it go to voicemail, but a strange feeling twisted in my gut. I hesitated, then answered. Mr. Carson? The voice on the other end was calm, almost detached. This is Westside Memorial. Your son Jacob has been admitted to the ER. He's asking for you. My heart dropped into my stomach. What happened? Is he okay? My voice was shaking. I can't disclose details over the phone, but you should come as soon as possible. I didn't wait for another word. I grabbed my keys and bolted out the door. The drive to the hospital was a blur, traffic lights, honking horns, everything blending together while my mind spiraled through every terrifying possibility. What had happened to Jacob? Was he hurt? How bad was it? When I finally pushed through the ER doors, the sterile smell hit me first. Machines beeped, voices murmured, but none of it registered. My eyes scanned the room frantically until they landed on him. Jacob was slumped on a gurney, his arm in a sling, his face swollen and bruised. My breath caught in my throat. Seeing my son like that sent something sharp and cold slicing through me. Jacob. I rushed to his side. What happened? Are you okay? He looked up at me, his eyes filled with tears, and that alone was enough to break me. Dad. His voice wavered. I saw Mom. I frowned, glancing at the nurse beside him, then back to Jacob. What do you mean? Where? He swallowed hard. At home. Relief flickered through me for half a second before I noticed the way his hands were shaking. She was with Thomas, he whispered. In your bed. The words didn't register at first. They felt foreign, like some cruel joke. But then I saw the pain in his face, the heartbreak, the betrayal. And suddenly, it was all too real. Katie, my wife of 15 years, and Thomas, our neighbor and supposed friend, had been sleeping together. And Jacob had walked in on them. I felt the world tilt sideways, but I forced myself to focus. What did Thomas do to you? Jacob swallowed hard, his good hand clenching into a fist. I tried to leave, but Thomas, he grabbed me. He told me if I said anything to you, he'd make me regret it. Then he threw me into the doorframe. I stiffened, my hands curling into fists at my sides. But Jacob wasn't finished. Mom, she helped him, Dad. His voice cracked. She locked me in the guest room. They just left me there. A rage unlike anything I'd ever felt surged through me. How could she? How could Katie, the woman I trusted, the mother of my child, betray me like this? But more than that, how could she stand by while Thomas hurt our son? I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady for Jacob's sake. I'm going to take care of this. Don't worry, son. Jacob nodded, a flicker of relief crossing his face. He trusted me. He knew that when I said I'd handle something, I meant it. But he had no idea what I was about to do. After making sure Jacob was settled, I left the hospital, my mind already working on a plan. This wasn't just about cheating anymore. This was about protecting my son. About justice. About revenge. Because if there's one thing you need to know about me, it's that I don't take betrayal lightly. I didn't go straight home. Instead, I drove aimlessly through the city, my thoughts dark and stormy. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. This wasn't just an affair. They were planning something. I needed to figure out what it was before I made my move. Eventually, I ended up at a bar on the edge of town. The kind of place where nobody asks questions. I liked it that way. I ordered a drink and sat in the corner, letting the alcohol dull the sharp edges of my anger just enough to think straight. I stayed there for hours, replaying everything Jacob had told me, piecing together the truth. By the time I left, I had a plan. It wasn't pretty, but it would get the job done. When I got back home, it was late. The house was dark, silent in a way that felt wrong. Katie's car was parked in the driveway. Good. That would make things easier. I stepped inside, moving through the house with a calmness that surprised even me. The living room was a mess. Empty bottles on the table, clothes scattered everywhere. It looked like they had been in a hurry to leave, but something had stopped them. I wondered what it was. I headed upstairs to our bedroom. The door was slightly ajar, and in the dim light, I saw the faint outline of someone sitting on the bed. Katie. She looked up as I stepped in, her eyes wide with fear. My gaze flicked to the safe in the corner. The door was open, the inside empty. All the cash, the important documents, everything I had stored there, gone. Jonathan, Katie said, her voice trembling. I can explain. I took a slow, deliberate step closer, my voice low and dangerous. Explain what? That you've been screwing Thomas behind my back? That you let him hurt our son? That you stole from me? She flinched at each accusation, but I didn't care. I was beyond caring. All I wanted was to make them both pay. Where's Thomas? I asked, my voice like ice. Katie hesitated, but before she could answer, I heard a noise from the hallway. I turned just in time to see Thomas standing there, a smug grin on his face. He didn't say a word. He just stood there, watching me, like he thought he had the upper hand. That was his mistake. I moved faster than he expected, grabbing him by the collar and slamming him against the wall. He struggled, but I was stronger, fueled by a rage that had been simmering all night. I could feel his pulse racing under my grip, and for a brief moment, I considered ending it right there. But then I thought of Jacob, lying alone in that hospital room, and I knew I had to be smarter than that. I let go of Thomas and turned back to Katie. You really thought you were going to walk away from this? Take my money, my life, and run off with this piece of garbage? I shook my head. Think again. She opened her mouth, maybe to protest, maybe to beg. I didn't care. I grabbed Thomas by the arm and dragged him downstairs, shoving him out the front door. He stumbled, barely catching himself before he hit the ground. This is just the beginning, I said, my voice cold. Come near my family again, and I won't stop at just breaking your nose. I turned back to Katie, who stood frozen in the doorway, staring at me like she didn't recognize me. Maybe she didn't. Maybe the man she once knew was gone. We're done, I told her. Don't come back. Don't ever come back. And with that, I walked away, leaving them both in the dirt where they belonged. But the story didn't end there, not by a long shot. That night was just the beginning. They had tried to destroy everything I'd built, my family, my business, my life. And I wasn't about to let them get away with it. I needed answers, so I hired a private investigator, a guy named Ree. He came highly recommended, the kind of guy who didn't ask too many questions and knew how to keep things quiet. I told him to dig into Katie and Thomas, find out everything, where they had been, what they were planning, and most importantly, what they were hiding. A week later, Ree handed me a file so thick it made my blood boil. The affair was just the tip of the iceberg. They had been siphoning money from our joint accounts for months, stashing it in offshore accounts under fake names. And the worst part? They had lined up a buyer for my company. They planned to sell it out from under me, cash in, and disappear. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about survival. I moved fast. Within days, I shut down all our shared accounts, rerouted the money to a secure location, and changed every password I could think of. I made a few calls to old business contacts, people who owed me favors. By the time I was done, Katie and Thomas didn't have a dime to their names. The sale of my company? Dead in the water before it could even begin. But I wasn't done. I wanted them to suffer. I knew they planned to leave town once the sale went through, but now, with their money gone, I wanted to see the moment they realized their plan had fallen apart. That afternoon, I parked a few blocks away from the house and walked over, keeping to the shadows. Through the window, I saw them pacing, arguing, their panic practically tangible. Thomas's face was red, his hands gesturing wildly as he paced. This isn't supposed to be happening. He hissed, voice high with fear. The money was supposed to be there. The buyer was supposed to show up. Katie was rifling through papers, her movements frantic. We just need to get out of here, Thomas. We'll figure it out later. We can still go. We just need to leave now. They weren't going anywhere. Not if I had anything to say about it. I walked up to the front door and knocked. 3 sharp raps that echoed through the quiet house. Inside, they froze. I saw the fear in their eyes, the way Katie clutched at Thomas's arm. They knew. They knew it was me. For a moment, neither of them moved, as if they were hoping I'd just disappear. But I knocked again. This time, they had no choice. Thomas was the one who answered. He swung the door open, his face twisted into a snarl. But I saw it. I saw the fear in his eyes. What the hell do you want, Carson? Thomas sneered, trying to sound tough, but I could hear the shake in his voice. I didn't hesitate. I stepped forward, pushing past him into the house. We need to talk. Katie was in the living room, frozen mid-step, her face pale with panic. Jonathan, please, save it. I cut her off, my voice cold, measured. I know everything. The money, the company, the offshore accounts. You really thought you could get away with it? Neither of them spoke, but their expressions told me all I needed to know. They thought they had been careful, that they had covered their tracks. They had underestimated me. You two have made a lot of bad decisions, I said, stepping closer, my presence suffocating the room. But the worst one was thinking I wouldn't fight back. I pulled out my phone and turned the screen toward them. Emails. Bank statements. copies of every transaction they had tried to hide. Rhea had done a damn good job gathering evidence, and now I had everything I needed to bury them. Katie's face crumpled as she sank onto the couch, her hands trembling. Jonathan, I'm sorry I didn't. You didn't think I'd find out? You didn't think I'd fight back? My voice was razor sharp. You were wrong. Thomas, ever the coward, made a break for the door. I saw it coming. Before he could take 2 steps, I grabbed him by the collar and slammed him against the wall, just like that night in the hallway. But this time, there was no hesitation, no restraint. You're not going anywhere, Thomas, I growled, my grip tightening. You're going to pay for what you did to my son, to my family. He struggled, but he was no match for me. I held him there, watching the fear in his eyes grow. You're done. Both of you, I said, my voice steady. You're going to prison for a long time. Thomas's eyes widened in terror, his breath coming in short gasps. He started babbling, pleading for mercy, but I didn't care. I was already thinking ahead, making sure neither of them would ever be able to hurt anyone again. I let him go, and he crumpled to the floor, gasping for air. Katie was crying now, her face buried in her hands. But I felt nothing, no sympathy, no regret, just cold, hard satisfaction. Reaching into my pocket, I pulled out my phone again and dialed the number I had saved. It rang twice before a voice answered. This is Detective Harris. It's Jonathan Carson, I said, my voice steady. I've got something you're going to want to see. You'll want to bring a couple of squad cars. Harris didn't ask questions. He knew me well enough to understand that if I was calling, it was serious. We're on our way. I hung up and turned back to Katie and Thomas, who were both staring at me in stunned silence. The police are coming, I told them, my tone almost calm. You've got a few minutes to think about what you're going to say, but it won't make a difference. I have all the evidence I need to put you away for a long time. Katie's tears had stopped. She lifted her head and stared at me, her face twisting in anger and despair. How could you do this to me? A bitter laugh bubbled up in my throat. How could I do this to you? Katie's face twisted with anger and desperation. You betrayed me, Jonathan. How could you do this? I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. I betrayed you? No, Katie. You betrayed me. You betrayed our son. And now you're going to pay for it. Thomas tried to interject, lifting his hands as if to reason with me. Listen, Carson. I silenced him with a glare so cold it made him freeze. You don't get to talk, Thomas. Not anymore. The room fell into an uneasy silence, the only sound coming from the distant wail of approaching sirens. Katie sat trembling on the couch, her hands gripping her knees, while Thomas kept his gaze locked on the floor. The weight of their downfall was finally sinking in. When the police arrived, I stepped aside and let them in without a word. Detective Harris took one look at the scene and nodded to his officers, who moved in swiftly, cuffing Katie and Thomas. Neither of them resisted. They knew it was over. Harris pulled me aside, his tone low and firm. You did good, Jonathan. This could have gone a lot worse. I exhaled sharply, my anger still simmering beneath the surface. Yeah, well, I don't feel like celebrating. His gaze lingered on me for a moment before he nodded in understanding. Justice takes different forms. Sometimes, just knowing the right people are paying for their mistakes is enough. I wasn't sure if I agreed with that, but I stayed silent, watching as the officers led Katie and Thomas out of the house. As they reached the squad cars, Katie turned back to me, her eyes filled with pleading desperation. For a brief moment, the memory of the woman I had once loved flickered in my mind. The woman I had trusted, built a life with. But that woman was gone, and the person standing before me was a stranger. I turned away without a word. There was nothing left to say. The police cars disappeared into the night, and I stood alone in the doorway, the house finally quiet. The weight of everything settled on my shoulders, heavy but certain. I had won, but at what cost? Eventually, I went back inside and lowered myself onto the couch, staring at the mess they had left behind. My thoughts drifted to Jacob, to how I was going to explain all of this to him. I didn't have all the answers yet, but one thing was clear. I had done what I had to do to protect my family. If that made me a different man, so be it. I would live with the consequences. Because in the end, I had survived. I had fought back, and I had won. And if anyone ever tried to cross me again, they would learn one thing for certain. Jonathan Carson doesn't forgive. And he sure as hell doesn't forget. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.